At your request, a Doomsday 2025 LSU football scenario. How would it look? We'll go through it. Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you so much for that. I was asked, and I will admit to you, this may not be a popular episode. If you are here, thank you so much. If you're an everydayer, I love you. And I am just pushing off from the dock here, acknowledging there are some of you who probably saw the title, the description of this episode, said, why in the world would I be interested in that? Or maybe you've made it this far, 60 seconds into this episode, and you're wondering, why are you going down this road? Well, I was asked a question by a listener. Shout out to Eric D. I won't say his last name in case he doesn't want me to. But Eric sent me a message, and he said, hey, Matt, will you do a doomsday scenario for LSU football and Locked On? I'm curious what you think the worst outcome would be. And I thought about it, and most of the time, we all want affirmation. We want confirmation, not information necessarily. It's not everybody. It's not always true. And I appreciate y'all very much. But so often we want people who say what we want to hear. But I thought it would be an interesting exercise because over the last month, LSU football has gotten their flowers. Now, that was not the case at the end of the regular season. It was a very disappointing season, as we all know. The Tigers did manage to beat Vanderbilt, Oklahoma to get to 8-4. They win the bowl game to go to 9-4. So you finish on a 3-game winning streak. But all of the negativity surrounding signing day with the Bryce Underwood stuff, Jakeem Stewart, Cade Phillips, we all know what happened. And since then, however, it has been nothing but climbing the ladder. You ink a top 10 signing class. You flip a 5-star in Solomon Thomas on signing day. You have the number 1 portal class in the country. Garrett Nussmeier returns. I mean, it has been nothing but positivity. The staff additions. Now you've added Alex Atkins. I mean, it has been really nothing but a solid, let's call it 6 weeks of positivity. And when you start to look at some of the way too early projections, top 25s, playoff projections, LSU's littered all over them because of everything they were able to do in the last 6 weeks to position themselves as such for next year. And so you're going to hear a lot of that. And a lot of the next 7 months, admittedly, are going to be why LSU can or will or should be a playoff team, win a championship, all that sort of stuff. And you're going to hear a lot of that from me because if you're an everydayer, again, you've heard me say that with what LSU's done over the last 6 weeks, I always look at, when I try to make a prediction or a projection for a team going into a given year, I look at 2 things. Who has the fewest amount of questions against the most manageable schedule? Well, when I look at this LSU team going into 2025, you're returning a 4,000-yard passer, the leading returning passer in the country. You're returning your best running back in Caden Durham. You're returning 2 guys who have started on the offensive line, but look at what you've added on the line. You're returning Aaron Anderson at receiver, Trades Green. Look at what you added in the portal with Nick Anderson and Barry and Brown and Bauer Sharp and Donovan Green, Destin Hill. That's not even starting on the defensive side of the ball where you added key players at every level of the defense, and you're getting Harold Perkins back. I mean, my goodness, I get it. Like, you don't have a lot of questions. Who's going to win the jobs on the offensive line? Yes, that's a question, but you have few questions. And as we're going to go through, the schedule is manageable because I always look at not just who you play, but when and where you play them. And the way the schedule plays out for LSU and the quarterbacks you're going to face and where you're going to face them, I think it is favorable. But what if you flip it on its head? What could a doomsday scenario look like? And for me, the first year that always comes to mind when we have this kind of conversation is 1998. And if you're old enough to remember it, you're nodding your head in your car, wherever you're watching or listening. If you're not old enough to remember it, I'll just remind you a little bit. So LSU had 6 straight losing seasons. Hard to believe, but 6 straight losing seasons from 1989 to 1994. They fire Curly Hallman. They bring in Jerry DiNardo from Vanderbilt. And in his first year, Jerry DiNardo bring back the Magic. Tigers end up going to the Independence Bowl. Great win over a top 10 Auburn team. Anyway, Tigers in 1995, they go to the Independence Bowl. In 1996, they take a giant step up. They go 9-2, win the Peach Bowl against Clemson 10-7 to go 10-2. And that was a time, remember, where 10 wins it was something to behold because you were only playing 11 regular season games and you didn't have the Rena wins. So you're going 9-2 in the regular season and winning your bowl game. And at that time, any fruit bowl was a big deal. So the Peach Bowl was a big deal for LSU back in 1996 to go there and to win it, to beat Clemson in that game. So you were going into 1997 on an upswing. You had a few disappointing losses. You beat number 1 Florida. You lost a week later to Ole Miss. You struggled to handle success a little bit. You went back to the Independence Bowl. But 1998 was a year that everybody pointed at as a year where LSU could finally break through, win the SEC West, get to Atlanta. In 1998, LSU was preseason number 7 in the country. Preseason number 7. And keep in mind, just 4 years prior, this was a program coming off 6 straight losing seasons, but the climb had happened. DiNardo had built, he had recruited, they had won, you had established some degree of expectation. And in 1998, remember, this was an era where you didn't have guys often leave early for the draft. You did lose a player early. Alan Faneca left after his junior year in 1997. Now, he was a fourth-year junior, but he left after 1997. But look at who you had coming back in 1998. It was all of Jerry DiNardo's first class. You had a senior quarterback in Herb Tyler, senior running back in Kevin Falk, the greatest player and the greatest runner, certainly in the history of LSU football. I believe his number 3 should be retired. You had a senior center in Todd McClure, 2-time first-team All-SEC, played 14 NFL seasons. You had a senior defensive tackle in Booger McFarland, who became a first-round pick. Aside from that, Rondale Mealy was back at running back. Mark Roman, who played a long time in the NFL. Fred Booker, who is an NFL defensive back. Larry Foster, who got in some off-the-field trouble, but he was a fantastic receiver. Kendrick Allen was a returning starter who played in the NFL. Chris Cummings was a returning starter. Rayon Hill was a senior and a returning starter. You had so much back. All of Jerry DiNardo's initial guys were seniors, and this was the time. Everybody was back. They were all seniors, and you were ready to go kick the door in with this very veteran squad. But what happened was, and the thing that everybody points to, and if you're not old enough to remember that season, what you will remember, or you will have heard, is people mention Lou Tepper, Thomas Dunson, the drop linebacker. Those are curse words. Those are dirty words, 4-letter words around LSU football. So they bring in Lou Tepper as the offensive coordinator. He implements a 3-4 scheme. He has something what he calls the drop linebacker. He had a book, incidentally, called Complete Linebacking, which is still kind of a punchline because the defenses were so bad. But sometimes history doesn't tell the whole story. Like, for example, that 1998 LSU team defensively was not great, but they were 56th in the country in opponents' points per game. They were 56th out of 112 at the time. They allowed 25 points per game, which is not good. By any means, allowing 25 a game is not good. But 25 a game is manageable, especially since that offense scored 30 a game. They were 30th in the country. Remember, this is before spread, hurry up, no huddle. I mean, the only team really doing that was Florida and Steve Spurrier. But statistically, you weren't bad. But what happened that season, where the nuance comes into play, is what really tells you the story of the 1998 LSU football team. And it was just a matter of consistently losing close games. So LSU wins their first 3. They beat Arkansas State. They blow out Auburn on the road, and then they beat Idaho. But I remember being at that Idaho game in 1998. And LSU beat Idaho 53-20, but you could see the cracks because Idaho was running the ball in that football game, and it was a problem. And so LSU's 3-0, and they're up to number 6 in the country when they host number 12 Georgia, who had a freshman quarterback in Quincy Carter, and nobody in that first half got a stop. Nobody got a stop in that game in the first half. And Georgia and Quincy Carter, and a true freshman Quincy Carter, ended up beating LSU in Tiger Stadium that day 28-27, beat LSU by 1 point. And then LSU had to go to Florida and play the number 6 Gators. And they lost 22-10 in gold jerseys that day, by the way. And that was a revenge game for Florida after LSU had upset them the year before. And then LSU came home to play Kentucky. And this was Tim Couch and the Kentucky Wildcats. Tim Couch, who was a Heisman finalist, who ultimately became the number 1 pick in the draft. And Kentucky kicked a late field goal to win that game in Tiger Stadium, 39-36. So now all of a sudden, you're 3-3. You're 1-3 in the conference. 2 of your losses are against the number 12 and number 6 teams in the country. One of them by 1 point. You lost to Kentucky and the future number 1 pick by 3 points. Again, your defense couldn't get a stop that day. That was Tim Couch. That was Kentucky. That was Hal Mumme. That was the early days of Mike Leach's air raid, courtesy of Hal Mumme. And defensively, you couldn't do anything that day against Tim Couch. Not many teams could. But then you beat Mississippi State, and everybody did, and certainly LSU did a lot during that era, 41-6. And you feel like you're back on track. And you had 4 games to go. But look at what happened. You go to Ole Miss, and you lose 37-31. You're home against Alabama, and you lose a close one, 22-16. You go up to South Bend. I was at this game, incidentally. And you got down big. You had some costly turnovers. Kevin Falk returned a punt for a touchdown in the game, which was awesome. But ultimately, your last-ditch effort falls short, and you lose 39-36. Herb Tyler got hurt. Craig Nall actually finished that game. So you're 4-6 now, and then you play Arkansas, who's Notre Dame, by the way, that game was number 10 in the country. Then you play Arkansas, who was number 13 in the country, won the SEC West, and blew the doors off of you at Little Rock at War Memorial 41-14. So when I look back at that season, you finished 4-7 and 2-6 in the league. And there were some games that you weren't super competitive. Florida, Alabama was a 6-point game, but Arkansas certainly. And I look at those games as games that were you weren't really in them, but really what swung that season is you lost at home by a point to Georgia. Kentucky kicked a late field goal in the final seconds to beat you by 3. You lost a close game. By the way, the Ole Miss game that you lost was in overtime. The 37-31 game, you lost in overtime to Ole Miss. I should have mentioned that. And then you lost by 3 to Notre Dame. It's 4 games that were close results that didn't go your way. And ultimately, that ended up being the difference between being a 4-7 team and then potentially an 8-3 team, and a team still on its trajectory. And then what happened after that is Jerry DiNardo retained Lou Tepper, and it went very badly. Again, you won 3 games in 1999. DiNardo was fired. In comes Nick Saban, and we know the rest. But the point is, veteran team, very veteran team, very good offense. Tell me this sounds familiar. Defense was awful, and in certain games couldn't get a stop when you had to have it, and it cost you an opportunity to win some close games. Sound familiar? That kind of is the scenario. So what would that look like if it played out in 2025? I'll talk about that in a sec. Locked on LSU, your team every day. The big game is almost here, and there is no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for your daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections. And if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with 1 more correct pick, and you are cashing out. So download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds, and you can feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that is the icing on the cake. So download the app, head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. So I've given you the historical perspective on what could go wrong for LSU. And this is how I think, as you look at 2025, it's sort of similar that it could set up. Of course, you have your senior quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier returning, but there's also big questions, right? You're losing 4 starting offensive linemen. You're losing your number 2 running back in Josh Williams, who is number 18 senior. You're losing your top 3 pass catchers, as we know, with Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, and Mason Taylor. When you look at the defensive starters that you're losing, again, these are guys that started. There's no way around this. And the production wasn't great, but they were still defensive starters. Greg Penn, Braden Swinson, Savion Jones, Zy Alexander, Sage Ryan, Major Burns, Gio Pius, Paris Shand. I mean, you're losing a ton of defensive starters. But the question is this addition by subtraction? Are you better with the players you brought in, even though you're losing starters? I would argue yes. So anyway, to the question as we started that Eric said is what would the doomsday scenario look like? This is what it is. The first and most obvious scenario would be an injury to Garrett Nussmeier. Now, I'm going to firmly knock on Formica. We're all going to hope that doesn't happen, and nobody wants to see anybody get injured ever. But if there is one scenario that would unfold that would say this is how it goes very badly for LSU, that's it. Because if Garrett Nussmeier gets hurt, then you're bringing in Michael Van Buren, who did play and for an injured Blake Shapen at Mississippi State this past season as a true freshman. And boy, did they struggle. They didn't win a single conference game. So while I believe Michael Van Buren has physical ability, he has not shown yet the ability to win in the conference. Now, a lot of that's not his fault. He was at Mississippi State. But if you lose Garrett Nussmeier, who is a 4,000-yard passer, the leading returning passer in all of college football, that's where the doomsday scenario starts, okay? But provided that there isn't a key injury like that, I think what would have to unfold is what unfolded in 1998. The defense that year under a new defensive coordinator in Lou Tepper just didn't gel. You had NFL players. I mean, Booger McFarland was an NFL player. You had Mark Roman, Fred Booker, Kendrick Allen, Chris Cummings, Rayon Hill. You had seniors, you had experience, and you had NFL talent on that defense. There was no excuse for them to be as bad as they were. They were poorly coached. They just didn't assimilate into what Lou Tepper was trying to do. Feels a lot more like what happened with Matt House in 2023 when Jaden Daniels won the Heisman, but LSU was a 3-loss team because the defense was historically bad. When I think about LSU a year ago, this most recent season, we look at LSU, and yes, they went 8-4, and they won the bowl game and got to 9. But you could play this game with me, and you could see how it would have unfolded similar to what happened in 1998 when they ended up with a 4-win football team. Look, you were an 8-4 football team, but you played South Carolina where they had 2 interceptions overturned because of penalties on the interception. One of them that was a pick six that would have ended the game for all intents and purposes. Now, despite what South Carolina fans say, complaining, it was absolutely a penalty. It was a stupid thing to do to go headhunt a quarterback and plow Garrett Nussmeier, which negated the interception, but it negated the touchdown. That's 1. 2, let's not forget, South Carolina couldn't get a freaking stop, so your defense stunk that day, and LSU did whatever they wanted offensively. But the other part of it, too, is South Carolina had a field goal at the horn that would have sent it to overtime, and he missed it. So you can listen to South Carolina fans moan and complain all they want. The bottom line is they had their opportunities. They're just not very good, and LSU beat them. But that game could have gone the other way. Well, now all of a sudden 8-4, 7-5. And then there's Ole Miss. I'll remind you, LSU never led in that football game. Don't get it twisted. Ole Miss was better start to finish. LSU never led in that football game until the final score in overtime by Kyron Lacey. I mean, you needed a fourth down conversion, the touchdown pass from Nussmeier to Aaron Anderson in regulation just to force overtime. I mean, as improbable as that play was. And then even think about it, man. You turned the ball over deep in your own territory in that game, and instead of kicking a field goal, Lane Kiffin decided to go for it on fourth down. You get a stop. That took away a scoring opportunity for Ole Miss that ultimately would have won in the game. So those two games right there were games that went your way in 2024 that were a fraction away from going the other way, and you're 6-6. Now, the other side of that is also true. You lost to Southern Cal, where they took the final lead with 8 seconds to go. You had a shot with Aaron Anderson, who scored earlier in the game, passed in the flat, and Nuss missed it. Scores that touchdown, maybe LSU wins. We talk about Texas A&M all day long, y'all. I mean, you were dominating that football game. You were dominating that football game, and you just weren't ready for Marcel Reed when he came in, and then Nuss unraveled. But midway through the third, you're up 2 scores midway through the third on the road, and you're dominating that football game. That's a game you probably should have won. Right there, those 2 games go your way, you're 10-2. I could even argue the Florida game, where you controlled the ball for 42 minutes of game time, you probably should have won that one as well. There's 3 games that you could have won that didn't. So they could have swung the other way. You could have been an 11-1 football team with your only loss, the unsightly one at home to Alabama. Could have been. But you didn't get it done. So ultimately, you are what your record says you are. But if you want the doomsday scenario for LSU, that's it. And it's looking at the close games that go the other way. I mean, you open up at Clemson. That's probably going to be a close ball game. Could you lose? Sure, you've lost 5 in a row openers. You should beat Louisiana Tech, and you should beat Florida in Baton Rouge. You should beat Southeastern. But then you got to go to Ole Miss. Now, I think Ole Miss is going to be down this year, losing a ton off last year's team, but that's still a road conference game, and it's not easy. And then you're home against South Carolina, which is a game that you should win. And then you go to Vanderbilt, which is a game that you should win. But how much better is South Carolina? Another year under with Lenora Sellers. And then you got to go to Vanderbilt, who has Diego Pavia back. And I'll remind you, Alabama went up there and lost last year. So could you go napping in Nashville and get popped? Sure, you could. You come home against Texas A&M, then you got to go to Alabama. You haven't had any success against them. That could be 4. You're home against Arkansas, that I don't think is going to be any good. You're home against Western Kentucky, and then you got to go to Oklahoma. Well, to Oklahoma, how did that fare for Alabama last year in Norman at the end of the season in November? Point is, I could find the doomsday scenario where you look at 5 losses on this team. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I love the talent they brought in. I love the fact that you have a great quarterback, and also the biggest difference between the 1998 scenario I laid out and this one is the head coach. And I understand there's some of you who may not be sold on Brian Kelly as a championship coach, but what you have to be sold on Brian Kelly as is a consistent coach where the bottom never falls out. You have a much higher floor as long as Brian Kelly is the coach. The 4-7 season that DiNardo had in 1998 isn't really a reality. Now, there's been one exception, and that was 2016 in South Bend at Notre Dame. And it was a very similar thing that unfolded like what happened in 1998. So Brian Kelly, if you look back at his years in South Bend, he had one ugly season, and it was 2016. The 2016 team, they were 4-8 there at Notre Dame. And, I mean, my goodness, that's something that is not that's not generally anything they're going to accept there. But look at how he sandwiched it. You know, he went from 10-3 to 4-8 to 10-3, 12-1, 11-2, 10-2, 11-1. So it was truly an outlier, but look at the games they lost. They lost the opener at Texas, 50-47, a score fest. Sound familiar? They lost a 3-point game to Duke, 38-35, score fest. Sound familiar? They lost a 3-point game. I'm sorry, they lost a 1-point game to against Navy, 28-27. They lost by a field goal to Virginia Tech, 34-31. Sound familiar? All these close results that go the other way. That's what happened to LSU in 1998. It's what happened to LSU and Notre Dame in 2016. And if there is a doomsday scenario for LSU in 2025, that's it. It's that you get locked in these close battles and you got to get a stop late and you don't get them. It's like what happened against USC. It's like what happened last year against Texas A&M when you fell apart, or you couldn't get the stop late against Florida. Those are the types of things that could unfold that prevent you from getting where you want to go. But I want to be very clear. It's not a prediction, because my prediction and the why it won't happen is because I always look at fewest questions, most manageable schedule. And when I'm on the fence, I look at coaching, quarterback, and venue. And when I look at LSU this year, you've got a championship caliber coach. You've got the best quarterback in the SEC. And when you look at the venues for LSU and where they're going to be playing games in 2025, yes, your road conference games are at Ole Miss, new quarterback. You're going to be at Alabama, new quarterback. You're going to be at Oklahoma with a new quarterback again. You look at your road conference games, and you're going to be at Vanderbilt. They have Diego Pavia back, but you should still beat Vanderbilt. The point is, you should still be favored in those games, and it should be a scenario where LSU is a college football playoff team. And if they are not, this is something you will hear me say for the next 7 months. If LSU does not make the college football playoff in 2025, my tone, my conversation about Brian Kelly will change dramatically, because this is a year where everything you need to have lined up for you has lined up. Now you have to go make it happen. See if you can. But we got 7 months to talk about it. And I promise most of the conversations moving forward are going to be way happier than this one. But thanks to Eric, who sent the question. Always encourage you, if you got things you want me to talk about, shoot me a message, drop your comments below. We'd appreciate that greatly. And please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review if you're on YouTube. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.